first and then hand it over to Jen and we'll start the recording. But welcome everyone. It's so great to have spent time with some of you already today, and welcome to those who haven't yet been in one of the rooms. My name is Allison Pearson. If we haven't met, I'm the manager with the Children and Youth Planning Table. I'm excited to be here with you today. In a moment, I'm going to toss it over to Jenn Hessen, who's here for They're All Our Children and Families, the shared philosophy of supporting children and youth and families in Waterloo region. The longest title, I think, of all of our sessions today, and lots of great content. So if you don't know me, just a little bit more about myself. So I identify as a white, cisgendered woman. I live in Waterloo and I'm a parent of 2 kids. And I'd like to, before Jen starts, I'd just like to acknowledge where we're broadcasting from and where I know Jen is. We'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we are is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We acknowledge the enduring presence of the Indigenous people with whom we share the land today, their achievements, and their contributions to our community. We offer this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada. And just a couple logistics, I mentioned this already. If you are able to mute your mic but keep your video on, that is a lovely way for us to connect with each other in this space. We are recording the sessions, as you heard a moment ago, and the chat will be exported. Speaking of the chat, we are really enjoying the comments, the thoughts, the questions that people are sharing in there. And you know that the Backbone team, we're kind of pulling all that content over into a shared space so we can bring all those insights forward. We'll really encourage you to use that area, and there's an ask or an opening at the start of this topic to share something you're grateful or hopeful about to kick us off. And finally, just to stay connected with your colleagues today, remember on social media, that's an option, and the address is there if it's of interest to you on the Collective Insights document, which is where we're pulling all that content over from today. So I'm going to stop sharing on my end. And then Jen, I think you're going for it on your end. And you're still muted, Jen, just.
Thank you. I thought I had unmuted, but I had not. So thank you for that. All right, I'm just going to get started here. Slide show up. All right, can everybody see my screen? Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much, Allison, for that introduction. It's my pleasure to be here. I very much wish I could see you all and be in the same room with you. I'm very much the kind of person when I'm delivering, I really like the energy in the room and being able to interact and communicate with people. So I'm definitely missing that. I don't know about all of you. I think Zoom has been obviously a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to stay connected in ways that we simply would not right now. But I do find myself often missing the opportunity to physically be present with people. But I do thank you for taking time today. Hopefully for those of you who have participated in earlier sessions, that's been a great experience for you. And we're going to cover off a number of things today. For those of you who don't know me, I will tell you a little bit more about myself and my background and what's brought me to the Children and Youth Planning Table. But before I do, as Allison said, I'm leading the session on shared philosophy of supporting children and youth in Waterloo region. And today we're going to have the opportunity to talk about what it means to collectively mobilize as one system for children and youth in Waterloo region and understand this philosophy and this concept of no wrong door. It's a term that's been used for many, many years, but we want to take a small opportunity to say, what does that really mean? And how do we all understand this concept and this philosophy of no wrong door? I'm also going to provide an overview for you of Family Compass, just fairly briefly, so that you can understand what Family Compass is, how it operates, and specifically how you as service providers can use Family Compass to better serve children, youth, and families in a holistic way and to understand all of the other services that are available within the community. So So basically, the session today, it's about 30 minutes of content delivery where I'm going to walk through some information with you. That leaves us a pretty nice chunk of time at the end of the content delivery for a Q&A and the opportunity for you to provide some input and feedback as to the session itself, what we're seeking to achieve, and if there's anything that you think might be missing that we could add or incorporate into the session for future delivery. So specifically today, what we're going to cover, we're going to seek to understand the landscape of collaboration and this idea of a shared philosophy of practice in Waterloo region. I'm going to share with you a story from a family's perspective. It's probably a story that you'll be able to relate to in a couple of different ways. And the reason for that is just to sort of ground everybody in this concept and this idea that we want to be serving and thinking about service delivery from the family perspective as much as possible. As I mentioned, we'll talk about this concept of no wrong door and exactly what that means and the way that service is delivered. Become acquainted with the shared foundation of practice and this work that was done, led by the Children and Youth Planning Table with many community partners to come away with a shared philosophy of how we deliver service. It will be important to know as much as possible how organizations and programs are connected to this broader network to support children, youth, and families, and really making sure we all have the appreciation that we're not alone, right? As service providers or even as organizations, what needs to be done and how we need to support and serve families isn't something that we need to do by ourselves, and nor should we try. And as I mentioned, I'll provide an overview of Family Compass and talk about how it can be used as a really great resource, both for families, but also for service providers to stay in touch with what's available in terms of service in our community. So that's what we'll cover off in the next 30 minutes or so. And then, like I say, that gives us the opportunity for hopefully some good dialogue at the end so that we can understand if there's other things that you'd like to see incorporated into the session. So this session here is intended to be a standalone for sure, a session that any partner or person working in the sector can participate in to familiarize themselves with the system itself and how it's connected. But it's also intended to be part of a three-part webinar series on interagency coordination and collaboration. We think that it provides a nice framework and a nice starting place for people as we get into more discussion about what a more formalized approach for coordination and collaboration in the region can look like. Oftentimes we're working, definitely across organizations and in many cases across sectors. So I think I know some of you in the room today, but there's many new faces of people that I haven't met. So I'll tell you just a little bit about myself and my background. My name is Jenn Hessen. I am a white woman and a Canadian immigrant, mother of one son living here in Waterloo. And I'm currently working as a consultant, doing work for a variety of organizations across Canada right now. So I work primarily with organizations in Waterloo region and in the province, but have expanded that work to be out of province across Canada as well. And just by way of background, I worked at Lutherwood for 15 years between 2001 and 2016 in a variety of roles while I was there, including executive director of Luther Village on the Park, which is the retirement community attached to Lutherwood. And I was also the director of operations and mental health services. And during the time I was working in mental health services, I was actively involved with the Children and Youth Planning Table and the development of the shared philosophy of practice. So part of that working group and part of the collective of organizations that came together to formulate that shared philosophy of practice. I also worked with DCERT, Developmental Services Resource Center, to establish the local system for coordinated service planning and helped to launch the implementation of CSP, coordinated service planning, between 2016 and 2018. And I can definitely say that my heart is in social service or human service leadership. I did spend a little bit of time working in corporate innovation at Communitech over the last couple of years and did some work for a retirement community in Hamilton. And while it's really exciting work, I knew something was missing and really wanted the opportunity to come back to the region. And so it's been a great opportunity to work again with the Children and Youth Planning Table and the Children and Youth Services Planning Council. So it's great to be here today. As I mentioned, in terms of logistics, about 30 minutes, lots of time for questions and some open dialogue at the end. So in terms of, when I think about the importance of seeing the big picture, and part of what we're going to do today is not just talk about the specifics of the services that are offered, but take the opportunity to think about the system as a whole and step back and see the big picture. And the reason that's really important for me for a couple of reasons, but I think about the analogy of sports sometimes, and thinking about how different things can look depending on your vantage point and where you're sitting and what you see. It can look really different when you're sitting in the stands, right, compared to when you're on the ice and playing the game itself. My son, who's 16 now, played hockey up until this year. And this is often the case. I don't know if any of you have kids who played competitive sports, but parents are often pretty vocal, and they sometimes think that they know what's best, and that they have these great things that they can say. You should have been here, you should have done that, you should have been here. And they have all of these great ideas about what somebody could have done, usually their own child, by the way. People will talk about other people's kids, but usually it's about their own child and what that person could have done differently, what their child could have done differently to perhaps have produced a better outcome. And in some cases, they might be right? So what they see and what they see could have been done differently might have actually produced a better or a different outcome. But the reality is that, the game looks a little bit different when you're sitting in the stands, when you're sitting high up and you can see the whole ice, you can see the whole picture. It's quite a different story when you're in the game and you're playing. You don't have that same opportunity to see the whole. And so a part of what we want to do today is just give people that opportunity to take that step back, see the system as a whole, and then see our place within it and how we can help serve families in a more connected and holistic way. For those of you who've worked in Waterloo region for some time, you'll know that Waterloo region certainly has a great history and a reputation for amazing collaboration and coordination amongst service providers. And we know this is important. I think we would all agree it's critically important. We also know it's very important based on the feedback and what we've heard from families who've shared experience with us and what it's like for them, especially when they're needing to access more than one program. So again, we're really fortunate here in Waterloo region that we have such a wide breadth and depth of services that are delivered by many different organizations. And that gives us a lot of benefits. One of the key benefits that we get by having such a variety of organizations that are involved is each organization brings their own focus and their own strengths. And so through that type of a service model where there's so many different organizations, we have the benefit of that expertise and that strength. And it means that no one organization, no one program, and certainly no one person all by themselves needs to be able to do everything, right? And thank goodness for that, because I can't imagine how overwhelming it would be or can feel to think that all of the needs of a family or all of the needs of a child or a youth maybe need to be served by one person or one program. Sometimes that's an overwhelming thing to think about. And I can tell you based on experience, when I talk about this spirit of collaboration and coordination in our region that we're so fortunate to have, having participated in some of the provincial tables, moving on mental health and coordinated service planning, not all communities are the same. I think when you've lived and worked in the region, for the most part, it's easy to just assume that this is kind of how it rolls across the province, and that isn't the case. So we're in a really fortunate position to be able to build on that strength and to leverage what we have as a community in terms of those strong relationships and partnerships. So in our quest, again, to serve families, I think sometimes for people at the front line, it's easy to either get overwhelmed and feel like you need to do it all. It's also possible that people start to get a bit narrowly focused on the particular responsibility within the mandate of the program. Most programs, have targets and outcomes that we're responsible for achieving and reporting within a particular mandate. So it's really up to us to be able to, understand what that is and be responsible, but then also connect to the broader system and thinking about that larger system and the capacity that exists to serve more holistically and more fully than any one organization ever could. And more important, more effective than trying to do it on your own is just knowing what the system looks like. It's a lot to keep track of. I think even, for myself, having worked locally for quite a number of years, things change, things shift. There's different mandates and strategies coming from the province. And it can be an awful lot to keep track of. And so just knowing that there is the system there and what resources are available for us to go to when we're faced with a situation where a family might need more than what we can deliver and provide is so critically important. For some families, we know that access to service might be pretty straightforward, right? What they need might be quite handily delivered by one organization. And then for other families, their needs might be a little bit more complicated, a little bit more complex. And so that may require some additional support. And it's up to us as the service providers in that equation, especially for the ones first involved or most involved, to be able to guide and direct and connect where we need to. So again, I mentioned in order to sort of just situate and ground for some of the other things that we're going to talk about, I'm just going to share with you a story. It's a fictional story, but again, a story that probably many people can relate to in their work with families, children, and youth. So meet Mary. She is a single mother of 2 children, Abigail, who's 10, and Riley, who's 14. When Riley started high school, Mary noticed that she became withdrawn and spent a lot of time in her room. Mary was worried, so she spoke to Riley's teacher, and Riley's teacher suggested that she speak with a guidance counselor, who eventually then referred her to go to a walk-in appointment at Front Door Mental Health Access Service. Riley was then linked with a counselor who was able to provide some one-to-one support, and things seemed to be getting better. And so Mary was pretty encouraged. And then Mary got a call one Saturday evening from a police officer saying that Riley had been arrested for breaking into someone's home with a group of friends. So when Riley was released, she was put on probation, referred to John Howard Society. And then in the months ahead, Riley's grades started to deteriorate, and she was failing most of her classes. She refused to go to school many mornings, and there was fights with Mary were increasing. And on a number of occasions, Mary found drugs and alcohol in Riley's backpack. So Mary regularly received phone calls then from the school saying that Riley's behavior was escalating. Eventually, Riley was referred to an alternative classroom. She wasn't being successful in a traditional classroom any longer. And at this point, Mary then began to feel pretty overwhelmed with everything that was happening. She was receiving multiple calls from service providers, and everybody was really nice and really helpful and trying to help Mary and the family move forward. But she was starting to lose track of all of the appointments, who was doing what, and where she needed to be at different times. A friend told her about a program at Ray of Hope that might be a good option for Riley, given her drinking and alcohol use. However, at this point, Mary was just so overwhelmed that she couldn't even muster up the energy to call or find out more information. So this, again, just an illustrative example how, from Mary's perspective, navigating the system, for one, navigating that system of support and just trying to keep everything straight, obviously can be a huge challenge. And we know that there's families who are dealing with multiple issues and more than one child, which can complicate things and make things even more overwhelming. So this, again, is the benefit when we think about, how in a particular situation a service provider might be involved with Mary and help connect to those other services and help bridge so that Mary's not facing that burden all alone. So again, it might be a familiar story to you, or components of that might be familiar to you. And in this situation, I mentioned that Mary's entry point was basically the school system. That was the first involved, where she then got connected to mental health services. But this concept of no wrong door, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, essentially means that Mary could have started anywhere. That was just the natural entry point through the school, and then got referred and started to move through some different services. But the idea with no wrong door is that really a family should be able to start anywhere, and that service provider that becomes the first point of contact or the first organization in is going to be the right place, and that if not the service to be delivered there, that there's a very seamless way to help move somebody into the service that they need. So again, we know families can link to service in many, many different ways. And depending on what their most immediate need is, right, that tends to be where things start. It might be through the school, it could be through mental health services, developmental services, could be a doctor, a medical clinic, hospital, justice services, childcare. And the goal is that service providers are at least well enough informed and know how to help families get to the services that they need in a coordinated way, so that regardless of what door to service the family enters, it does end up being the right door. And as service providers, again, we can see ourselves as this part of this whole, right? And that's the whole system and the whole service family. And families don't necessarily fit, right, into one sector, into one program, into one organization, and we know that. So while the services are typically set up around ministries and funding and organizations, right, that's just the way programs and services tend to be funded and delivered and what organizations are accountable to. It then becomes up to us to be the ones who can connect across those sectors and organizations to ensure that a more holistic service can be provided. And one of the ways that we can create some commonality in the way that we're delivering that service and in our quest to serve families in this way is using the shared foundations of practice or the shared philosophy of service that can help organizations to align to a common way of thinking, a common way of working within the context of their own organization, so that we can create a more integrated service experience for the families that we're serving, that they start to receive a similar approach in the way service is delivered, regardless of the organization that's involved. So in terms of what the shared foundations for practice is about, and I don't know how many people on the call today are familiar with this, or perhaps were even involved in the formation of the shared foundations of practice. So I'll just walk you through just in a little bit of detail what each of these areas actually means. So in terms of family, child, and youth centered, typically pretty straightforward and something that most organizations have embraced, an understanding that making sure that we're putting the child, the youth, and the family at the center of service, and always remembering that regardless of our own mandates or own requirements, ultimately that's what we're there to do. We're there to serve the child, the youth, and the family. And so what does that mean when we think about that in practice? Well, it means things like the children, youth, and families are driving the decisions, right? They're an equal partner. They're at the table, and that we're listening to them, and they have a say in how that's happening and the decisions that are being made, that we're not just acting as the expert and telling them what to do. It's about recognizing power and privilege inherent in service delivery, right? So we come as service providers with a certain degree of power in that relationship. And so the willingness to acknowledge that and understand that in the relationship. Authentically engaging children, youth, and families and communities. So being there as we are and really as authentically as possible. It's about using preventative and proactive approaches. It's easy, depending on the nature of the situation, to fall into reactive measures and trying to fix and always trying to problem solve, which might be necessary. But we also know the power of preventative approaches and thinking about what we can do to prevent something bad from happening or falling apart, and how we can be more proactive in how we're working with families. Providing help at the earliest stage possible. Again, from a prevention perspective, we know that's critically important. Having flexible support. So reality is programs and services that families might need to access may have a wait list. So while they're perhaps waiting for service or needing service, how flexible can we be in supporting them during that time so that they're not waiting without the necessary supports? Thinking about supporting children and youth and families to overcome barriers. Right? So what are the barriers? What are the things that might be prohibiting them from being successful? And how can we be a part of removing those barriers? In terms of holistic, again, we think about holistic as being obviously thinking about the person, the family as a whole, social, emotional, physical, spiritual. And again, our parts that we play in the service delivery might be a piece of it. It's not about delivering it all, but it's about connecting to the whole and making sure that we're thinking about people holistically. Supporting children, youth, and families in their communities and their cultures, right? So recognizing that that might look a little bit differently, and we might need to adjust our service and think about how our service and where our service gets delivered differently to be able to meet those needs. Being present, authentic, and human. And again, this recognition that family is defined differently, right? Long gone are the days of the cookie cutter family approach where we see families all as one particular makeup, and recognizing that family it can be quite diverse and quite different depending on the unit. Connected. So what we mean by connected is sharing resources, knowledge, and expertise, right, across the sector, across service providers, so that we're all managing that connection across the system so that families don't have to. And what does that mean, right? Terms like collaboration and cooperation get used all the time. We talk about collaborating, but what does that really mean? Well, it means respectful dialogue and sometimes having some pretty courageous conversations with our partners about what we need from one another and maybe what we're seeing needs to happen differently. Creating those conditions for interagency consultations and joint engagements. So, being aware of what each other is doing in service of the family and where appropriate and necessary, maybe engaging in some of those joint conversations to make things a bit more seamless. Promoting and referring to the most appropriate service. Sometimes it's us and sometimes it's not, and that's okay. So if there's another service that's, would be better for that family to be working with, that we acknowledge that and we find ways to connect a family with that service as easily as possible. And opportunities for community-wide learning. So the Children and Youth Planning Council is an organization or a planning organization that brings together service providers serving people 0 to 18, typically more vulnerable. And one of the mandates, the shifts in mandates over the last couple of years for that group has been to focus more on community-wide learning opportunities and how we can identify ways to strengthen the skill and the expertise of service providers more collectively so that individual organizations aren't left to figure that out on their own. And then informed, right? So we think about evidence-informed practices. And so what do we know about that and how do we use those? Well, we do know, again, focusing on strengths is a good practice. It's an evidence-based practice that suggests when we focus on people's strengths, they thrive and they do better. Understanding diverse populations. Again, the way our service might be oriented and organized for delivery may or may not be meeting the needs of diverse populations. So how can we become informed about that? Looking at things like the social determinants of health, right? And using those social determinants of health to help guide our service and how we're working with families. And so again, the goal for the shared philosophy of practice is essentially that service providers are operating from this common starting place. And organizations likely will have their own modalities and maybe their own clinical models that they're using within their organization. Could be DBT, CBT, or trauma-informed. And this is just intended not to replace that in any way, but to be the common place and the common perspective from which service gets delivered. It's about really weaving that through and weaving it together to provide the necessary system of support. So let's just take a quick look. I mentioned to you sometimes the benefits, and some of you may be familiar with these planning and collaboration tables and some not, but the benefit of taking a bit of a step back and understanding what's operating in the region can help enhance our perspective. So planning and collaboration tables, in general, they're driven more by ministries, right? So it could be the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Community, Children, Social Services, Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities. So we have these different ministries who are operating, who may actually be sort of driving some of the directions that need to happen in each community, but consistently across the province. But they can also be a little bit more grassroots or bottom up, where as a community, it's been sort of identified and established that a certain way of working together is important. So, really it's, these planning and collaboration tables then allow different organizations who are often funded differently, often through different ministries, to come together and develop goals and objectives for integrated service delivery. So it's the opportunity to do some real planning. Often what happens at the ministry level is you get, handshake agreements across ministers and ministries to say, we want to work together, as was the case, for example, with special needs strategy. But what does that look like when you actually get to the community level, right? Because that can be established at the ministry level, but actually finding ways to come together and plan collectively with the service providers who are involved at the local level is really, really important. So planning tables and collaboration tables provide that opportunity for organizations to think about that cross-sectoral collaboration. So again, planning and collaboration tables help connect, the whole idea is to connect the service system to some extent, right? To find ways for that integration, for that sharing, typically have representation from multiple organizations who deliver programs and services for their particular mandate. And the work done at these tables informs then how services are delivered and what should the area of focus be. So as I mentioned, with the Children and Youth Services Planning Council, there was an opportunity to redefine the mandate and focus on training. So figuring out what does that look like and how things can be best organized by community in order to deliver on what we're seeking to do. These tables guide, again, how services are delivered. As a service provider, there's an opportunity as well. So it might be informing how programs and services are delivered. Then there's also an opportunity for organizations to feed up to these planning tables to say, hey, like I'm noticing something here in how the service is being delivered. And I think it's something that maybe as a community, we should be thinking about doing differently. So there's the opportunity then for organizations and people within the organization to also feed up to these planning tables to help inform that work in a way that's going to improve service. Because we know, again, that families, youth, and children often need many, many different things. So how can we use these planning and collaboration tables to make sure that it's organized in a way that makes sense? So I'm not going to go into detail about all of these planning and collaboration tables. They may be some that you're familiar with, perhaps some that you're even involved with. But these are some of the primary tables that are operating in the region that are focused on different things in order to integrate service delivery. And so while government provides funding according to their ministries and to the local organizations to deliver on the mandates, this graphic here really just depicts the categories of services that a family may need access to. And again, the family may not even be thinking about service in these categories, but it's a little bit more of a logical way from the service provider perspective, as well as from a family perspective, to think about what might need to be accessed. This is how services are organized within Family Compass as well. So if you've been on Family Compass, this might look familiar to you if you were looking at search for services. This is essentially how it's set up. So again, at any given time, you might have families that need access to services across these different categories or multiple services within each category. So health and wellness here, that would include things like breastfeeding programs, family doctors, pediatricians, family youth counseling, could be hearing, vision, immunizations. We also think about health and wellness in the broader context of mental health, could be nutrition, prenatal services, public health, respite sexual health services. It would also include special needs or therapy services that a family might need access to, youth addiction services, prenatal, walking clinics. All of those things would be, services that are delivered under the category of health and wellness. Youth employment is pretty straightforward. So in terms of youth employment, that's going to be, any programs or services that are designed to help youth find jobs or help find volunteering opportunities. Fundamental needs, so things that would be included in this category of service, would be child protection, could be a family needing to access clothing, community outreach, food programs, housing and shelter, or access to income support. And then here in parenting, we have parent support groups. It could be parent-child activity groups that they can participate in together, parenting skills classes, prenatal support. And then over here in early years and childcare, we've got things like the Early on Child and Family Centers, learning and childcare, the One List Waterloo region, so access to childcare services for people who need that. And then recreation services, camps, community centers, could be libraries, neighborhood associations, recreation, youth drop-in would be things that would be covered there. Cultural services will include, anything related to First Nations, Métis Inuit services that would be specific to the population, Francophone, settlement and newcomer services. And then legal, we would have things like assault or violence services, could be family legal services or legal clinics, youth justice programs would fall here. And then education, alternative education programs, literacy, private schools, school finders, school tutoring. So for people who need access to tutors to help with the education of their children. So again, if you think back to Mary's situation and all the different services that were needed and required there, definitely crossed over a lot of these categories. So it would have included health and wellness, education, legal, and probably some other things that weren't even identified in that scenario there itself. And then within each grouping of service, of course, we have multiple organizations who might be delivering those services. So again, just sort of thinking about the broad spectrum of things that a family may need access to, and how as an individual service provider, we can be positioned to help connect them into that the larger system itself. So one of the best ways, from my perspective, to help families, children, and youth is really just to understand the system, right? Understand the broader system, the landscape of the broader system. Whether anybody can ever keep track and remember everything that's being offered at any given time, I think would be a bit of a tall order. But it's most important to just know where to go, right? To know that there is a bigger system and where to go to access those services if and when a family need is arising. So I think about it, it's like a bit of an equivalent. I don't know how many of your organizations have, big policy manuals where, it might be like a 500-page policy manual. It really isn't about knowing each policy, right? It's not about being able to recite the policy or knowing the content or knowing all of the ins and outs of everything that's in there. But really what's important is to understand that it's there in the first place and that it's a resource and that you know where to go if you encounter a situation or something that you think you might need to go back and reference, right? So it's similar in the service system, I think, where, there's a lot going on, there's a lot happening, programs and services may be changing, mandates may be changing for ministries, and it's really just about knowing where to go to be able to find the information and that you have the ability to do that and then connect families accordingly. And Family Compass is a wonderful resource and guide for exactly that. So it was created in partnership between the Children and Youth Planning Table, the Special Needs Strategy Planning Table, and Moving on Mental Health. And I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was a few years ago for sure that Family Compass was born and was created as a resource in order to support not only families, because it's a great resource for families, and there's a wonderful opportunity for families to go directly, but it also just becomes a great resource for service providers. Again, for those of you who've been around for a while, you might remember the Blue Book. The Blue Book was like this, kind of like the phone book, but of social services, and it listed everything out. So, I mean, obviously that can get out of date pretty quickly. We've come a long way. Now the opportunity to have things a little bit more accessible and easier to update. So some of you might be quite familiar with Family Compass, and hopefully you've had the opportunity to actually use it as a resource. And I won't go into a ton of detail because there's a nifty little video that was put together that should work for me to share with you here. But essentially, when people click on Family Compass, they're greeted with a screen that gives them three options for how they want to explore the services that are provided. They can search for services, which then again, they can either type in a name or they get the buckets of categories that I reviewed. If they have a specific concern, they have the opportunity to complete a brief questionnaire, and then it helps guide them to the right starting place organization. And then there's a door here basically for access to parenting resources. But rather than listen to me explain it, I'm not sure it's going to let me click on it. Yeah, I will. So I'll let the video speak for itself.
Waterloo Region has many programs, services, and resources for children and youth. But sometimes it's hard to know what all those options are or where to turn for help. Family Compass Waterloo Region is a quick, easy, and interactive website for busy parents, professionals, and youth who are looking for local health, social, or recreational services. It can also help you find an organization to address concerns about your child's or youth's development. When you first visit Family Compass Waterloo Region, you will have a choice of three options: search for services, I have a concern, and resources for parents. Let's take a closer look at each of these options. Search for Services is a powerful search tool that guides you through thousands of local health, social, and recreational service listings. Just enter a word or words that describe what you're looking for and click Search. To further limit your search to a specific community, just select it from the drop-down menu. You can also explore popular categories of services or browse a list of organizations in our community. It's that easy. But what if you're a parent concerned about your child's development, or a teacher or doctor looking for services to help a child, or a youth worried about your own development? Family Compass's I Have a Concern Service Finder tool can help. By answering a few confidential, multiple choice questions about your concern, Family Compass Waterloo Region will recommend a local organization as a starting point. Best of all, you don't have to commit to anything. When you complete the questions, you will be given two options. Either save and print your results so you can contact the agency yourself when you are ready, or click Send to Service Provider, and the agency will receive your responses and follow up with you. It's your choice. And let's not forget the Resources for Parents feature, which links parents to information and resources that help with parenting and connects parents to others with similar experiences through the Parenting Now website. And that's it. It's that easy to find local health, social, and recreational services right here in Waterloo Region. So visit us at familycompasswr.ca and let's get started.
All right. So Family Compass has also put together just a more specific resource in the face of the pandemic and COVID-19. So there's some additional windows when somebody clicks on the COVID-19 tab, some different options appear. And I don't know, Allison and I talked about whether we should include this because we're hoping very much that we won't need this definitely forever, hopefully not for too much longer, but currently it is something that's available. So important to know if you haven't checked out Family Compass in a while, that it provides a really nice snapshot of some additional services that are available to families. So again, ultimately, it's really just about understanding the broader system as a whole. I think especially for, frontline service providers who are there working with families, children and youth each and every day, recognizing that there is a whole system, that they don't have to do everything by themselves. And it's about knowing how and where to connect families with the right service at the right time and developing those pathways between service so that there is the opportunity for the system as a whole to collectively support families in our region. So thank you. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to run through the content. And as I mentioned at the beginning, what would be really, really helpful for today, but also going forward, and recognizing that, we'd like to be able to have, about a 30-minute pre-recorded webinar or video that people would have the ability to review and access on demand. I think especially important sometimes for people who've been working in the field, but especially for new people who might be coming into a role in the region who haven't previously worked in the region, to start to get their head around what's available and how what they do connects to something bigger. So I've put a couple of questions up here on the screen, and I'm just looking at the time. It looks like we have about 10-12 minutes that we can have some discussion and perhaps dialogue about some of these things. Allison, I don't know, or I don't remember, will people be unmuted, or is it best if they put something in the chat?
People have the choice. I think if it's wonderful if you unmute and ask your question. If you raise your hand, we can kind of keep track of it a little bit, but yeah, if you can ask it verbally, that's wonderful. Then you can say it exactly how you want it said.
Right. So if we focus maybe on the first bullet point, and then we'll make sure we have a couple minutes, or even following the session, if you're willing to sort of provide a bit of feedback on what you liked or what you wish, a little bit more generally. But maybe we can start by thinking about, what are some of the challenges that you or the people that work with you face in your daily work in terms of connecting families, children, and youth to the service system. And then with that in mind, what additional information do you think of that could be provided in a webinar like this to address these challenges? And what opportunities do you see to collectively mobilize the system as a whole in service of families, children, and youth? Maybe some things that we're doing that we need to strengthen, or things that we haven't been doing that we need to focus on. Open it up.
Jen, if you want to, I don't know if you want to stop sharing your screen, that can maybe help. Okay. And we do have Jen till 2:50, so we only have a few minutes together. And I might go back on my comments a moment ago of please do use the chat because we do want to make sure we get a chance to hear everything. But I think people Jen's questions are about like your initial response, like could you imagine using a webinar of this sorts with your team, and is there something in there that you think, oh, I wish it would have more about this, or maybe I would change this part of it? So I have in the chat here, feel that in an effort for families to find more resources, they have to share their story many, many times. Right. That was part of, so the partners who came together around Family Compass, part of the thinking around that middle door, that second door about I have a concern, giving young people and parents the option when they have shared all those parts of their story and they are connected now to a best starting point organization, to have that option to push on what they just shared, so that the organization receives that and actions it from that point, perhaps asking some questions of clarification, but they have shared that first part of their story and it's not a repeat then.
I do think there is still, there will be work to do on that. Like, will always be work to do on that. I think there's some challenges again around, privacy and consent and, shared electronic documents. And, but I agree. I think it continues to be, a bit of a challenge, I think, for families, especially when they're accessing multiple services and, needing to continually repeat their story.
Fair. Long way to go on this one, right? Yeah. Other comments?
I would have a quick comment.
Hi, Pamela.
This isn't exactly what you were asking in the about the overall webinar, and I don't work directly connecting families to services, so I can't necessarily give feedback in that way. But in looking through Family Compass, even just now, I was clicking on it on my phone to navigate it as I was watching the video, and so I clicked on mental health in the kind of, I'm looking for resources and that category. And when I pulled it up, I saw a variety of resources there, but I didn't really see what they did. And if I was confused and unsure about where to go, I would see, oh, there's like 5 records listed for hospitals, and then Front Door is listed, but Horizon isn't, for example. And where do I actually go in here? Like, there's no one line about what they do. So if I'm trying to link them, or I'm trying to link myself to something, and I see that, I don't necessarily have, the title says a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily say, this is a great place to go if you're looking for ABC kind of thing. Maybe that's already done by, I have a concern, and maybe that's better in that portal. I haven't clicked on it to test that portal. But I think from a self-navigation perspective, I could probably list like 8 other service providers that aren't in that list under mental health. So then that makes me ask the question of, how comprehensive does this include a broad array of private service providers as well as more publicly funded providers? And places I as a parent have been referred to aren't listed in there. And it also doesn't even include like psychiatrists that are around. So, and what is that path? So I would just be curious around, I don't know how families are navigating, and if the I have a concern works through in a triage way a little bit better, but something I'd be curious about, how to enhance Family Compass so that I feel a sense of it being comprehensive, and that I have a good variety of options that I can look into, and I know where to start, for example. I would have more thoughts, Jen, at a different point on how your webinar could be used differently, given that I'm at an outsider to the system, so I might have a couple of comments. Happy if you wanted to follow up separately. So feel free to, I'll stick my, I don't know, I'll get you my info somehow. I'll find yours and get you mine.
Go through me if you want.
Okay,
I appreciate it, Pamela. So your comments are there about that first door, that search for services, the door that's set up for that self-navigating experience that people want. And you're reflecting on, from what you know about service system options, you're noticing, I'm not seeing some options that legitimately fall in that space. And you're also noticing that the content provided, the information isn't quite giving maybe the user enough or the right helpful language that they're going to then feel confident that this is where I would ultimately want to reach out to.
Right, like how to look at that list. Okay, there's 12 things that came up. Which one is actually right for me? I don't quite have enough information to know, and all I have is a website to click on where I'm going to be back on a hospital website going, I don't really know if this is where I'm supposed to go for this issue with my kid, for example.
Right. So great.
So yeah, you caught it.
Appreciate that. I think follow up from you as you do go into that second door where you might have some additional thoughts would be welcome at any point. But I think I definitely am getting that sense of as we continue to think about how Family Compass works in the best way possible for the community, where might we need to be paying close attention to that first door in particular?
Right, and maybe families like the second. I'm happy to try that one and see if it works differently for any one of the variety of concerns I might search it for. So I'm happy to give you that feedback anytime.
We are at our time for this session. As you're wrapping up your thinking and your thoughts here, again, I'm inviting people in the chat to throw an insight you might have for something that you're walking away with from this session, thinking I'm going to bring that into my work, or this is something I think as a collective I'd really hope that we can think about or work towards, or what have you. So invite those comments there as you're leaving the room. Thanking you, Jenn, for your time with us today and bringing this forward. And thank you everyone for being able to make time in your day and be here in the room together.
Thanks everyone. Bye.